So, hi everyone. We are beginning this EP session, Decolonizing Ontologies, Sustainability, Spirituality, and Revolution. And we have today 3 papers, amazing papers about those issues. And first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Raquel Noronha. I'm from Federal University of Maranhão in Brazil. I'm a designer and anthropologist, and it will be my pleasure to be sharing this EP session. First, I will invite you to take a deep breath and connect with our indigenous people and pay homage to them. I would especially like to connect with the indigenous people in Brazil who are going through difficult times with a great harassment and state violence today. I'm going to read a short quote from the work of Ailton Krenak, a Brazilian indigenous leader, in his book, Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. When we despersonalize the river, the mountain, when we take away their senses from them, considering that this is an exclusive attribute of humans, we free these places to become... We free these places to become residues of industrial and extractivist activities. As a result of our divorce from interactions with our Mother Earth, it results that she is leaving us orphans. Not only those who in different degrees are called Indians, indigenous peoples, or native peoples, but everyone. Thank you, Ailton Krenak, for your struggle. So now I will present the first paper. All of these papers, they are bringing discussions on ontological turn, bringing questions as sustainability, spirituality, and revolution to our participatory design approaches. So we have works and research ruled in Brazil, in Lebanon, and in Denmark. The first paper has as authors Danielle Wilde, Mary Karyda, and Iben Fog, and the paper is entitled Foraging Tangibles for Participatory Design, Decolonizing Co-Creative Processes through Sustainability Engagement with Places. So we'll have the video, then we have a 5-minute conversation. Thank you.
Scandinavia, where Mary and I are both settlers. We speak to you from Denmark in Scandinavia, where Mary and I are both settlers, and our co-author Iben is Danish. We acknowledge the role of First Nations peoples the world over as custodians of the land and pay our respects to elders past and present. We are grateful for your listening. Historically, PD shifted the narrative in design from designing things for everyday life, things like chairs, to designing things thought more broadly, practices, processes, and things that might be useful for thinking through collaborative processes, such as tangibles that aim to support enriched and negotiated reflection. Increasingly, we hope, designers consider the environmental impact of the tangibles they use and whether the materials involved can return to the nutrition cycle after use. But social and environmental sustainability cannot stand apart. If sustainability is to be robust and lead to regenerative practices, they must be entangled. One way to entangle them is to forage for tangibles in place. Our paper is called Foraging Tangibles for Participatory Design, Decolonizing Co-Creative Processes through Sustainable Engagement with Place. To support this thinking, we turn to Canadian researcher and designer Max Le Boiron. Le Boiron speaks about colonialism as a set of contemporary and evolving land relations that can be maintained by good intentions and often good deeds. This sounds like the kind of values that often drive PD. Le Boiron makes 3 key points about pollution as colonialism. Pollution is not a manifestation or side effect of colonialism, but is an enactment of ongoing colonial relations to land. There are ways of doing pollution action using methods that are specific, place-based, and attend to obligations. And methodologies are always and already part of the land relations, and thus are a key site in which to enact good relations, sometimes called ethics. When Le Boiron speaks of land, they often capitalize the word to indicate a primary relationship that extends beyond a fixed material space. They cite Stiers and Zinger, who position land as a spiritually infused place grounded in interconnected and interdependent relationships, cultural positioning, and is highly contextualized. We tentatively transpose this understanding to PD's engagement with more than human environments through situated action. We critically consider our PD methods, methodologies, and actions in place through this understanding of colonialism in an attempt to open up the ethics of our practices and evolve our understanding of how to practice design as a set of good relations.
We explore these ideas through two cases: a steering committee meeting for a proposed forest-based library and the workshop run by a food waste NGO. Both cases take place in Kolding, Denmark, and use tangibles for stakeholder mapping. Our first case, the forest library, is envisioned as growing library in the land that can facilitate sharing knowledge about wild edibles in critical ways. To begin the library visioning process, we brought together a steering committee of local experts from education, cultural organizations, the university, the forest surrounds, and the botanic gardens. We held two activities, 10 days apart: a walk and talk in the forest with coffee and cakes made of forest fermented fruits, and a stakeholder mapping workshop, followed by a dinner of forest foods. We focus here on the stakeholder mapping. The workshop took place in a barn in the forest area, where we could work alongside our non-human stakeholders and consider how our library might be planning to colonize their natural space. At the moment, forests in Denmark are reconsidering their output beyond extracted products. Through the forest library, we bring community considerations into this discussion. To begin the mapping process, we ask the participants to write on cards the groups, communities, humans and non-humans they think of as stakeholders in the forest library. Then, to work around the barn and forest an object for its stakeholder. The barn was full of curious objects. This request was unusual for the participants, and some found it difficult, but they collectively supported each other to be in action. Most importantly, it made them think in new ways about the stakeholders. For example, one participant connected the ceramic bird to people who would be visiting the forest library, making a metaphorical connection between the characteristics of a living bird and people crossing places. Another used an object that they took from the outside of the barn to represent nature. Once the objects were gathered, they mapped them in relation on the table and then repositioned them in terms of influence. The repositioning helped them to recognize that there were several centers and levels of influence.
This selection of artifacts naturally followed the flow of the exercise, and it raises questions about the ethics of our process. If we think of nature as vibrant matter following Jane Bennett, and ourselves as settlers in the sense brought forward by Le Boiron, and if we take seriously the growing calls to decolonize design, we can begin to open up new kinds of conversations around how we collaborate with both nature and place moving forward.
Our second case, Food Waste Utopia, is a workshop carried out by a local NGO. Food reformers are based in Kolding, Denmark, and they are known in the city for using surplus food to raise awareness around the problem of food waste. The Food Waste Utopia workshop brought together 3 groups of stakeholders that work with food waste and climate adaptation to imagine possible futures of co-benefit. There were 11 participants in total, from local government, grassroots organizations, and food reformers themselves. They split into 3 mixed groups and were given forest surplus foods to map out what they saw as key food system stakeholders. The forest foods were surplus foods collected from local supermarkets and bakeries before they were thrown out. They were within their use-by date, but had too little time left to be suitable for sale. The relevance to the organizations was clear, as was their misunderstood value. We found that people gave meaning to the food in different ways. For example, they use kale or orange to represent the municipality, saying that both are available all year. Kale was also used literally for its color to represent an organization called Green Calling. A broken banana represented Repair Café, an organization that helps citizens to repair broken things. The food was used as catering, tangible design objects, physical manifestations of the food waste problem, and as a conversation starter. We noticed that at first, some participants felt uncomfortable playing with food, but everyone was careful with it, and at the end of the workshop, they took the food home. These changes shifted their feeling of discomfort to care and connected the workshop to their everyday practices.
Both cases use foraged artifacts as tangibles. In the Forest Library workshop, participants foraged artifacts in the workshop locale, both inside and outside the barn. The articles weren't known in advance, neither were the stakeholders, and the tangibles were not connected to the idea of a library per se, and they had no fixed meaning, but they were intimately connected to place. In Food Waste Utopia, the organisers foraged foods from the local food system and provided it to participants. The stakeholders were known and the tangibles were familiar and literally embodied the matter of concern. Both cases involved nature to afford deeper engagement with context and placed participant assumptions about context and belonging into question. The foraged ready-mades eased communication between participants and troubled their connections with place by leveraging juxtaposition and collision to defamiliarize assumptions and enliven the mapping process. Using any kinds of materials in PD raises the spectre of sustainability. In doing this work, we aim to consider material sustainability in social as well as environmental terms. Coming back to Le Boiron, we draw from their assertions that pollution is an enactment of ongoing colonial relations to land or place, that there are ways of doing pollution action using methods that are specific, place-based, and attend to obligations, and that methodologies are always and already part of land relations and thus are a key site in which to enact good relations, sometimes called ethics. We use this thinking to trouble our PD practices. We don't pretend with this work to solve the challenges of making PD sustainable. More humbly, we hope, we take seriously the idea of decolonizing design in more than human, social, and environmental terms, to raise an idea and open our thoughts in action to the scrutiny of the PD community, in the hope that you might join us in this inquiry moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, do you have any question to the authors? Yeah, Mary and Iben.
I have a question. Can I make speaking or in the chats?
Both, Gustavo, please be free.
Okay, so at first when I watched your presentation, I thought wrongly that it was about a kind of more tactic and specific design procedure. The use of foraging as tangibles. Reading the paper, I understood the strategic and more ecosystemic aspect of it and the impact, the wide impact that it can have. Can you comment on this relationship between a choice of materials in workshops? That is something that it can look very small at first glance and the more wide impact and implications.
Yeah, thank you, Gustavo. That's a really lovely question. Something that we're trying to do in this work, it's part of a larger kind of program in our research of trying to understand what does it look like to collaborate sustainably, you know, with social and cultural as well as ecological and economic concerns everywhere together, how do we actually shift our relatedness to the nature that we're within and part of, and that's within us? And by foraging the tangibles in place, it created a very, very different connection to the place that people were thinking about. If we think of the library, it somehow rooted them. They connected to the objects, connected them to the place, even though the objects were things that were placed in there. They were placed in a barn. They were, you know, strange and curious things, but they brought people very, very present to the environment that they were working within, to the point where, you know, some people started going out into the garden and the forest outside the barn and bringing things in, and being very forthright in the fact that they were doing that and what it meant and what it was doing. And it's having an impact on the kind of conversations that are able to be had. It's at the foundation of coming together and thinking about the forest library. So by being at its foundation, it's changing what can grow out of that foundation or stand on that foundation. And I mean, to know the impact of it in the longer term or the larger kind of systemic impact, you know, we probably need to wait a little bit of time to make any pronouncements about that. But certainly the qualities of attention and the qualities of thinking about place are very different. And then if we look to food reformers, they've been using foraged foods, this sense of foraging from within the food system, taking it out of this process of going from supermarket to dumpster, essentially, or food sales point to dumpster. And by foraging it from that point in the food value chain, they've been using that as a foundation of all of their efforts to engage people in thinking about what it means, the amount of food that's wasted. In our small city in Denmark, the amount of food that they rescue in this way is absolutely phenomenal. And of course, one of the ways to make it visible is to have it tangibly there in front of you. You can touch it, you can smell it, you can taste it. They have dinners out of it. They do all kinds of things. And again, it shifts the qualities of the conversation that are able to be had. And I think that goes through absolutely everything.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else would like to make a comment or a question? So, Caroline, I think we can go to the second video and then we come back to conversation.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Gustavo and I'll be presenting the summary of the exploratory paper that I wrote with my research advisor and partner, Karine. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past and present. Well, we all know that today there are different critical views and practices that are aimed to build a participatory design that is truly democratic in its process and in its results, taking into consideration issues like race, gender, social position, and geographic location. From the perspective of Akama, Hagen, and Wangasholen, we could say that the goal would be establishing a respectful, reciprocal, and relational participatory design. In the words of Ibarra, maybe we could call it a sentipensante participatory design. Like Light said, we need to surrender and unlearn. All of them urge designers to build their processes from perspectives that are both personal and alternative to those developed in the tradition of historical industrial global north design. Specifically, Ibarra's proposal for a sentipensante participatory design is based on the concept of sentipensar, articulated by Arturo Escobar and presented first by Orlando Falsborda, who found this non-dual way of thinking in the ontology of a Colombian community. By sentipensar, he understands the combination of mind and heart aligned to guide life decisions. Ibarra implies that sentipensante is when we put ourselves in the project, think about it while we are transformed by it. Concepts such as sentipensar move us because of their depth and scope, but it's often difficult to translate such concepts into actions and behaviors, particularly in participatory design projects. And it's very easy to fall into hippie cliches. For us, in our research project, we felt the need to find practical guidelines on how to operate this kind of concepts based in our own stories and paths, so that it did not become a superficial and anodyne appropriation of theories and practice too distant from our realities. That's why we chose to work with Management by Mandalas, a methodology co-created by Lama Padma Sante and the community of the Bodhisattva Buddhist Study Centers to manage a large network of initiatives that includes dozens of villages, centers, and Buddhist study groups all over Brazil. I had a personal experience in this community for several years and still have connections with some of its members. We used the Management by Mandalas approach in a co-design research project aimed to create an innovative model of patient association with a group of people involved with the Prader-Willi syndrome. That is another community that I'm involved with. We worked together in 2 workshops through 6 stages that corresponded to strategic elements of an organizational model. That is displayed in the Social Innovation Strategic Mandala here, a tool built for the project based in the Social Innovation Scanner by Meroni, Fassi, and Simeone. From the Management by Mandalas methodology, we took 4 principles: calming the mind, recognizing co-emergency, sitting in a circle, and accepting people in their contexts. Those principles guided what we are calling sentipensante co-design, because it blended thinking and feeling in the process. The principles do not by any means constitute a ready-made formula. They were selected for this project from various materials that contain Management by Mandalas orientations. For sure, there are many approaches that could produce the sentipensar, but we highlight that a structured and authentic spiritual discipline goes beyond the occasional instrument resource. We think that serious internal reflection cannot be a simple step in a co-design process, something that is only related to a certain project, but rather a part of a continuous commitment of the designer to nurture and mature their sentipensar along their lives. In the case described in this paper, we maintain that we were able to develop a sentipensante co-design when we explored a methodology which was intimate and meaningful to us, in addition to offering an alternative to mainstream approaches. This methodology was not imposed on us, but chosen among other possibilities. We had some fluency in its ontology, methods, and operation. It was easier for us to identify both our bias and potentials for openness. In summary, we conclude that it's important to promote the sentipensar in participatory design as a way of building respectful, reciprocal, and relational processes to surrender and unlearn. However, we argue that this needs to come from ontologies that, in addition to oppose the orthodoxy of the field, have a deep meaning for the designers involved, in a way that is not just the mere replication of formulas that are distant and disconnected from their lives and inner worlds. So, thank you so much, and in the Buddhist tradition, we would like to dedicate this work to the benefit of all sentient beings.
Thank you, Gustavo. Do you have some questions, comments? Please, Vincenzo, you can write or can talk with us. Hi.
Hi, Gustavo. My question is very maybe small detail.
Your sound's too low for me. I can't hear you properly.
Me too.
Okay, let
It's
me
slow.
try to not sure it's better, maybe.
Better.
Okay, let's see, maybe I can do something like this.
Yes.
About now? Okay, good.
Better.
So thank you for the very interesting presentation. I like it very much. I only, well, I focus on small detail, but just because it catches me. But and is the why you think it is particularly important for participatory design, this kind of perspective, sentipensante. I mean, so what is special about PD that makes it so relevant?
I think that since the aim of participatory design is to foster participation, I think it would be useful for us to have introspective discipline and different introspective tools for us to recognize and to work with our own minds, because the relationships that we establish in workshops and the project in a wider sense, they involve a degree of introspection of how we understand these relationships, how we build these relationships. And even if we don't recognize this kind of introspection, it happens. So I think that the contemplative traditions, be it Buddhist or other contemplative traditions, they're very useful so that we know how our mind operates and how we can be mindful. Mindful is a very mainstream word today, but how can we recognize the way that our mind operates during different kinds of relational processes? And I think this has to be trained, and this has to be studied in an ongoing basis. It's not something that you learn, for example, I don't know, in a weekend to prepare for a workshop. That is more or less what we mean. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? So I introduce the third paper of the day, and then we come back to our discussions. The third paper is by Reem, Talhouk, and Armouch, and the name is Dialogues on Decolonial Participatory Design Praxis During a Revolution. So,
hi, I am Reem Talhouk, presenting on Dialogues on Decolonial PD during the Lebanese Revolution. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the place I am presenting from and the place from which I'm thinking and doing. I'm currently in the United Kingdom, enmeshed within the country's colonialist legacies and debris. I'm also a Lebanese woman, and for this I will now speak in Arabic to acknowledge my roots that have shaped my histories. أنا ريم تلحوق بنت رفعت تلحوق ورلا الأعور. أنا بنت ضيعة عيتات وضيعة قرنايل بجبل لبنان. أنا بنت لبنانية. لبنان is a land named and created through European colonial rule. Partitioned from the Greater Syria area, Lebanon was a French colony before gaining independence. Being a land that has held many empires, it is a land of many religions and ethnicities. In 1975, the Lebanese Civil War broke out due to economic instability and conflicting ideologies and stances regarding conflict in the wider region. With different warlords claiming to be fighting and protecting the ideologies of their respective religions, the war was very much fought along sectarian divides. The war ended by the signing of the Al Taif Agreement in Saudi Arabia, an agreement that was supported by foreign powers. On the surface, the agreement is a power-sharing agreement, but in reality, what it did was formalize the warlords as the political leaders in government and enabled the entrenchment of sectarian political governmental practices as the public services were controlled by the different warlords. These warlords are still in power today as parliament members, ministers, and presidents. And they now form the political and economic elite, whose willful mismanagement of the country has entailed a history of political, social, and economic unrest, and often violence. In October 2019, the peoples of Lebanon took to the streets and broke into government offices and buildings. The people were calling for a complete overhaul of the political system and the overthrowing of all those that have been in power since the end of the Civil War. People were also calling out neo-colonial complicity that has supported and maintained the political elite and the unjust systems they have put into place. Therefore, we as the Lebanese design researchers view the revolution as a decolonizing one. We also view the revolution to be a decolonial one, as people part of the revolution are formulating new political imaginaries from and with the margins that challenge urban-rural divides and engage with the pluralities of worlds held and envisioned. It is also the feminist revolution that is calling for the rights of women, refugees, migrants, and LGBTQ+ communities. As the revolution ruptured our life worlds, we found it pertinent to reimagine PD with and for the revolution. And we did so through dialogues amongst ourselves and our interlocutors, with Lebanese public health activists supporting the revolution, and with decolonial and decolonizing knowledge. In doing so, we unfold our praxis by unsettling it and ourselves, and raising questions that we refold into how we think and do. In the rest of the presentation, I will present some of these dialogues and the questions raised. In our previous design endeavors in Lebanon, we would typically partner with primary healthcare centers and provide health services to communities. Through our dialogues, we consider how the majority of the primary healthcare network and centers that function within it are supported by one political party or another, or a religiously affiliated party. Thus, they make the centers in themselves tools for domination by the political elite that view these places as sites for sectarian and political clientelism that maintains them in government and as interlocutors of the colonial agenda. Nawal al-Saadawi, a prominent Arab feminist scholar from Egypt, points to how through these means, religion acts as a continuity of colonialism. These dialogues raise the questions of how we may navigate the system as researchers and designers who support the revolution. And if we are to only partner with organizations that have not been co-opted and subverted by the political and economic elite, would we potentially be excluding people and communals that are resisting within the system? How do we work with resistors from within when they themselves may purposefully be less visible? Also, As Lebanese design researchers, we are entangled with the revolution and its imaginaries. Given that we had previously worked with refugees in Lebanon and the issues they face, it was of particular importance for us to understand how the revolution's imaginaries are considering and accounting for refugees' worlds. While a lot of the revolution support an intersectional feminist imaginary that advocates and centers refugees, this was not shared by all of those whom we were in dialogue with. Indeed, it was highlighted to us by activists that due to international funding streams from the UN, EU, and other Western nations and organizations, they viewed refugees to have more health rights than that of Lebanese, and that they are instead now focusing on Lebanese citizens. This exclusion of refugees may be viewed as an act of horizontal violence, as those that seek liberation oppress others while doing so. It is also akin to the exclusion of migrants within white feminist movements in the West, as highlighted by Verge. El-Saadawi points to how by segmenting the oppressed into categories facilitates in us losing sight of the wider system of oppression, and so we find ourselves asking, how, by working with one marginalized community, we may be enacting horizontal violence within the revolution, and how we may work towards restoring humanity for and with all of whom are oppressed in a context where oppressors have thrived on segmenting us. Lastly, we ask, how can we do this in interculturality, where we keep our differences, but yet build solidarity? These dialogues are part of our effort to redefine the terms of PD in our praxis, as they, for us, are an ongoing state of disorderly rupture, as the imaginaries of the revolution are continuously being formulated and are unfolding. And as we reimagine, we continue to deepen our engagement with the epistemologies of Lebanon and the region, its peoples, religions, and faiths, in the hope for future worlds that are decolonial and just. I would like to end this presentation by highlighting that the peoples in Lebanon are still resisting and demanding change. And the government has continued its oppression and means of maintaining control, with more recently cracking down on the LGBTQ+ community during Pride Month and on refugees. I urge all of us to support the revolution by exploring the complicity of our own respective governments in maintaining the Lebanese political and economic elite, and how we may resist within the interweaving web of coloniality and colonialism. I urge us all to support the revolution by asking the questions we should be asking ourselves, our praxis, and our participatory design imaginaries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reem. And I'd like to know if there's some questions to Reem.
I have a question.
Okay.
So, Reem, I found very interesting in your paper how conversation, first-person conversation, is like the main tool that kind of aligns the entire paper. And I would like to hear a little bit more, because it's not something that's usual in the design fields, but it's very usual, for example, in the indigenous culture, the conversations, the circles of dialogue, they are very important. And I don't know, I find very interesting, and I would like to hear a little bit more of this thread of conversations that you have as a tool.
Yeah, thank you, Gustavo. A very interesting question. I don't think we ever thought of it as a tool. I think it came out of the way that we do things, and in the way that everything is a conversation. And I think it comes, at least for me personally, I always kind of refer back to my grandmother's house, where we have what we refer to as the dud, which is a big room, and she would wake up in the morning, open the door, and then people will start coming in and out. And as people come in and out, the conversation moves, shifts, and also moves to other people's houses, because sometimes everyone decides, let's just go to another house. And I think that element came through as we were having these conversations, but also the view of knowledge as a conversation. And I think we don't do that as much. So even as we were writing the paper, you can see in the paper, like, we picked and choose elements of different kind of decolonial theorists, and put them into conversation with each other, because I think there's an element of, we do not necessarily have to agree with everything being said by one person, but we need to take that knowledge and put it into conversation with others, and kind of, and here I referred to Ahmed Ansari's keynote, where he talked about dialogue. And so we tried to do that in the paper as a bit of unsettling ourselves, and kind of reflecting a bit of maybe that inner thought dialogue that we were having as we were encountering and becoming intertwined within the revolution, as well as the system in itself.
Great, thank you. And I loved the image of your grandmother's house, because this is very common in the countryside of Brazil also. This is exactly the same that happens. Raquel is like nodding.
Yes.
There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And I'd like to also to make a comment, Reem and Sarah, about your paper. When I was reading, I was waiting by the end of the paper to find the materiality in your approach, and I didn't find it. So I was thinking how was important the power of the speech in your paper, and how we can improve participation by conversation, and that's my collective question to all of you. How we are talking about tangibles, intangibles, and participation by through spirituality, and how we can deal with this different kinds of means to reach participation and decoloniality, because all the three papers, they are talking about decoloniality in different ways with different theoretical approach, but all of them are improving the discussion. So I would like to hear you about materiality, immateriality, and decolonization. Just a comment to you all.
Can I start by responding to that one, please? And I want to welcome Iben, my co-author is here, and Mary is here somewhere. It's really exciting for me to be paired with these two papers, because I think opens up the ways that people can approach my work, and it certainly opens up the ways that I'm thinking about the impact of that our work can have. Because while we're focused on an embodied engagement with tangibles as a way of supporting thinking, it really is an epistemic question. It's a question about our spiritual relation to land and place and nature. You know, we're always seeing ourselves as so separate from nature, and these are the kinds of discussions that are running through, you know, that are fundamental to indigenous understandings of self and place in the world, and that seem to get a little bit more distant for people in the global north, particularly in a very privileged country like Denmark, you know, where the choices that people can make in Denmark are very different to other places. So for me, the tangibility is something that helps us to think in other ways, that open up a space for these more spiritual and open and diverse positionings from a multi-species perspective.
Thank you, Danielle.
If I may kind of respond to that and I agree with Danielle, and I think the question of what is material and the materialization of things is so different as not just diverse perspectives, but the diverse moments in time. So I don't know about you, Sarah, but even when we were in the protests, there is something palpable, right? Through the conversations, in the debates that were happening in squares that were previously privatized, they still are, but people are like, no, we're gonna sit there. There's something palpable. So I think there is a materiality to the relations that we build that isn't that physical materiality, but you still feel it. And I think that becomes very important as we're thinking of what do we bring into participatory design? And it's not necessarily always materials.
From the perspective of our paper and what we've been discussing, Karine and I think we are trying to acknowledge and to bring some light to the inner world also, because we have a lot of studies and a lot of discussions about the outer parts of the participation and the relationships in design workshops, for example, but there's not so much reflection about the inner world, what is happening inside the designers and the people that are participating. And I think this is why the concept of sentipensante it's important, because it talks about inner worlds, and the inner worlds of the people that are participating in the process, they are interconnected and interdependent of the outer world, be it the material outer world that we can view it with our eyes, or the immaterial outer worlds, the ecosystems, be it the biological ecosystems or spiritual ecosystems. So we have to have tools to deal with this complexity, all these relationships that we cannot see in a more quick way.
Thank you, Gustavo. Any comments?
Raquel, I think Ahmed had his hand up at some point.
Oh, yes. Yes. Please, Ahmed.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. A very, very interesting set of presentations. I had a question around, there's a lot of debate around the spiritual in other fields, fields that deal explicitly with religion. And I'm wondering, I guess my question was more targeted towards Reem's presentation. I was thinking about, we can see alliances between groups that have very specific interpretations of religion, and alliances with groups that are secular. It's usually secular elites that form these kind of tenuous alliances with religious fundamentalists. And that's not really how, I'm thinking mostly on South Asia's context, like that's not really how, I think there's a real argument to be made for religion. So I'm not sure if this is entirely a question, but it's a kind of tension that emerges, right? I mean, you've had anthropologists of religion like Dalal Asad say that secularism is in itself a form of life and a mode of society that is its universalization happens through colonialism. So I'm wondering how you kind of navigate that tension. Also, just to Rachel's earlier point, I'm sorry, your name. I would agree in pushing back against the materiality bit. Like there's some really interesting work on like how Eurocentrism short circuits the relation between God and materiality, whereas you don't find that in, you know, lots of other cultures. So materiality itself is kind of culturally contingent and mediated.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you. I guess how do we navigate? I think that the thing is, and this is some of Nawal Saadawi, who also we picked from, has been criticized for, is that it's, and we tried to kind of navigate that as much as we could in an exploratory paper, but I think it's not about rejecting religion. I think what it is about is rejecting the weaponization of religious institutions for patriarchal control, as well as oppression, and as well as pitting people against each other. And that becomes quite difficult because part of the revolution of the debates has been secularization, separating religion from state, and so on. And that's been opposed, but it's the first time in a long time that we've been talking about these things, right? And we have those debates. And so I think navigating is through having these conversations that don't challenge the centrality of religion to the everyday lives, beliefs, and knowledge systems, but challenge how they are being used for economical gain, for justifying violence against one another. And that's where it becomes key. Like we grew up, at least I grew up, being told to avoid discussing religion in Lebanon. And that is because of the civil war that very much leveraged religions and ethnicities to wage the war. There was, in the capital city, there was a line dividing Beirut's Muslim side and Christian side. So it is part of our unsettling to ask, well, how do we have these conversations when we've been socialized not to avoid further conflict? I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's where I'm at right now with all the complexities of it.
Please, Danielle.
I'd like to follow up on Reem's comment in response to Ahmed and say that what was coming to mind, Ahmed, when you were asking your question, bringing up your thoughts, and also it was kind of compounded when Reem was bringing forward, was the notion that in our work with tangibles, we kind of use the tangibles as a Trojan horse, because it's not about the objects, it's not about the things at all, but the objects and things give people something to focus on so that they can then have the discussions that they need to have that are sometimes really difficult to actually have. They're things that people aren't used to speaking about or bringing forward, and they're people with very different opinions sometimes who are together in the same room, and it helps sort of orient them rather than against each other. Actually, they look at the tangibles and it helps them negotiate discussions. And my background is in theater, and Anne Bogart, an American theater director, always used to say, as an actor, if you give yourself something to focus on, then there's a part of your brain that can be occupied with that. And then it leaves the creative part of your brain actually free to create and to think more freely and unconstrained by that part of us that holds us in check, because it's busy. And in the case with tangibles, we try to leverage what giving something for people to focus on, we have to put it above here, or how do they position in relation to each other? Does it capture what we want to capture? How is it not working? Because then they can start to maybe find language for what it is that they kind of envision as maybe working, things that they didn't have language before, because they have something to position themselves in relation to that's not the other. It ceases to be a binary, but something else happens.
Thank you, Danielle.
I would say, Ahmed, that the way to navigate these tensions is with awareness and critical thinking. And even, I don't know all the religions in the world, but I know that everywhere we find the rebels, and we always will find the rebel thinking and the critical thinking inside religions also. I think the broad scope and treasury of religions of all the history of humanity, I think there's too much. That brings benefit to us to just put aside because of the power problems that we know that every religion also has. But I think there is awareness and critical thinking.
Thank you. I'd like to comment about this, about Ahmed's comments, that beyond the question of materiality and immateriality, spirituality, in many of our countries, we have very difficult social situations. We have struggle, we have war, revolution, and when I was reading, especially Gustavo's paper, I was thinking about how we can work with this proposal of an inner site. If you are dealing with hunger, with struggle, with war, and how we can deal with these more sensitive and more immaterial approaches in these very hard situations, as I found here in Maranhão, in the north part of Brazil. People, I'm working with a group that they are in struggle with the farmers, and all the times they are under harassments or under bullets. How can we think spirituality in these situations? It's just a comment. I don't know if I have time. Just 2 minutes, but if you'd like to comment.
Yes, I think it's interesting because I think we also find in religions or in spiritual disciplines groups that works in very hard and problematic environments with hunger and war, and we see this everywhere. For example, in Brazil, during the military dictatorship, we had, for example, Catholic groups that were helping revolutionaries, and they were helping also to build social structures to help people that were in facing problems like hunger and poverty. The Tibetan community also didn't have this dualism between should I practice my spirituality or should I help to settle refugees in India, for example. Things went hand in hand, and I think the tradition of service in a religion is one kind of response for that. And often the social action is mixed with introspection and prayer and different kinds of spiritual practice. And saying this, I'm not downsizing the social problems that we are living, and it's very, very difficult to meditate when we are hungry or protecting for bombs. But I also think that we have an experience where social action and introspection are mixed in a way.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to wrap up, someone would like to say goodbye? Gustavo, Reem, Danielle?
And to Iben and Mary.
Thank you.
Yes, and Sarah also, and Karine is not here.
And thank you everyone for sharing this virtual, but also thought space and emotion space as well together. It's been really, really rewarding, but also emotional for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Reem.
Yeah, it's very enriching. I'm so grateful that they put our 3 papers together. It's really, really great.
Thank you. I loved the conversation.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
amazing moments. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Caroline and Sophia, for the support.
Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion and for this opportunity to be here, actually. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.